Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Elliot. Elliot, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Love it. Love it. Well, Elliot, just from the few seconds we've been talking before the podcast, he is obviously smarter than I am. Like, that's a great way to set the stage because it's 100% true. Elliot, maybe just share with us a little bit about your background, what you love about marketing, what you do, things of that nature, and then let's dive into the subject for the day.
Well, first of all, it was more than a few seconds, and he's absolutely incorrect on being smarter than him. In the minutes and moments we've been chatting, he made it pretty clear that he's lived this and breathed this. So I appreciate your perspective of this. Anyways, I come from the world of cybersecurity. I am a marketing director over at a company called Drata. Also run two podcasts, which I'll annoy you all about later down the road. But I have a background in journalism, taught myself marketing, and got a master's degree to make sure I have a fancy piece of paper to have the talk behind the walk.
I love it. I love it. It was funny. I was at a family gathering and they were talking, and I had never known this, but my mom was desperately afraid I wouldn't get a college degree and all sorts of stuff. And I did finally do the final efforts to get that paper. Not a master's, just my bachelor's. That was as far as I went, but I love it. So what's cool is the subject really ties in. You talked about journalism, and I've found that that is an interesting background to have for what we're going to talk about today, which is really how do you elevate internal experts? How do you bring out the thought leadership that's inherently built into your business? I mean, no matter what you do, there are people in the business that are experts at it. And if they're not, then your business probably sucks. And so it's figuring out how to elevate them. So Elliot, when you're looking at this, what are your initial impressions? How do you kind of build thought leadership from the internal resources that naturally are experts in your field and the area that you're looking at?
Yeah, so I wish I could tell you that there's a really strict strategy that I approach this with. Like, hey, it's some people just raise their hand, which obviously makes life easier. But when it comes down to it, it is having conversations just like this internally with folks to get to know them, understand their backgrounds, where they come from, what they've done, what they do. And in those conversations, you can easily find out if there's just a raw talent there. Like, you likely have people building products, help guiding customers, having conversations with customers. And that work that they do positions them as strong experts. They just might not necessarily be the most comfortable speaking in front of 500 people, 300 people. Fortunately, the stuff that I do embraces that exact concept. You don't have to be well prepared, especially being in cybersecurity, where our persona is not someone who wears a suit and tie. Some of them do, but a lot of them are more laid back, hoodies, jeans, those kind of things, which means that raw talent actually works more. They're more aligned with what I'm trying to put together because they speak the same language, they look the same way. It's a personality match.
So it sounds like it's a big emphasis to focus on the authentic expert, right?
Yes.
Not trying to make them look and feel a certain way, but it's about embracing who they are because the market will really kind of latch onto them and latch onto their message. How do you embrace that? Especially when they may not feel like that they're super comfortable with that concept, and the business might be like, well, should we polish this up more? Should they be a better speaker? How do you kind of weigh out, how that presence kind of lapses over your brand and everything?
Yeah, so I can break this apart a few different ways. So I tend to beat people over the head with a stick a little bit to get my way on some of these exercises. So I will say it that way. I think it's just a matter of really painting a clear picture of a roadmap of what I'm trying to accomplish. And as long as they understand the audiences that we're chatting with and they have the right mindset, which I wouldn't work where I work if they didn't have that. So if I have to spend most of my time explaining and educating, it's not a great match. So the other piece is if you're chatting with people, you tend to pull stuff out of them. So our CISO over at Drata, I just thought he was like a giant lovable nerd is the best way to explain it. But in conversations with him, he ended up being like a closet raver. like he goes to raves, and he's about the same age as I am. I did not know that at all. So like, I was like, where's that guy? And not necessarily like goes out crazy party and all that stuff, but like there's character, there's personality. And that's kind of what I'm doing. So if you've ever looked into like brand building and you have voice, tone, and personality, you want to find people that could exude the concepts behind the brand. So I developed a year ago, and we're going through a brand refresh, so hopefully this thing dies. But I developed this thing called the Drata Mullet, which is basically party in the back, business up front. So as we're building relationships, yes, we'll be comfortably professional. But as you get to know them, you find out things like our CISO is a closet raver, and we'll be able to take advantage of that because as we have webinars, events, conferences, you can take advantage of those personalities and put them in front of people because at the end of the day, people are people, and it's not just a suit and tie. So you can rip the tie off as you get to know them and build content and stories around it. And that's kind of like the ethos there.
I love that. That brings up some really fascinating points. When you're hiring, it almost puts a bigger emphasis on your hiring to say, we are so comfortable with who we are and the external facing persona of who we are that we hire really well because we know that every single employee is a reflection of our brand, a reflection of who we are, so that every one of them can go out and have a platform. Every one of them can talk about what they want to talk about. In the collection of all of that is who we are, and I think it's so authentic. If it's a security company and everyone wears jeans and hoodies and that's authentic, that's great. Like that's your brand. That's who you are. But you're really like a big nerd about, cybersecurity in specific areas. Like that's what people will come to trust because it's that authentic personal touch. So I love that you're talking about that. And if you give your employees a platform, that's awesome. That brings out your brand even better. If you're afraid to promote that from someone, they might not be a culture fit because you're afraid for them to represent the brand. So I think that's really fascinating.
And there's two components to that. So in hiring, our VP, who I antagonize on a regular basis and brought me into the company, she has always made it clear that it's not culture fit, it's culture add for all the folks that we chat with. And I definitely see a good reflection of that in the people that I try to rope into this other program that I've just started to develop. We'll call it Drata Labs, like the code name. A nicer, fun way of calling it editorial and content strategy. But that new program is not just looking at like our C-level people to build that thought leadership and expertise. It is finding the people, again, just as I mentioned before, who have all these interaction points, who have a lot of opinions, who understand this stuff well, but might not have the platform or never felt like they had the platform. And now I do this. I pull them aside for 30 minutes, sometimes in groups. I'll record the conversations, pull the transcript. Sometimes I'll send that transcript to a freelancer to turn it into content. Other times I'll turn it into like little clips and videos. But it is basically turning into a content machine, and it focuses on the people element, which in the cybersecurity space, everything is about technology, often neglecting the people side. So the idea is to elevate the human aspect, the human perspective. But yeah, that's exactly right. We have culture add, culture fit somewhere down the road too. But there shouldn't be like a hampering on like, you're kind of weird. Maybe you should stay in the corner kind of situation. It's never been one of those.
Yeah, I love that.
Except for me.
The one behind the microphone. So you mentioned groups. I want to double click on this. So I think a lot of times we talk about, okay, I sit down with one person. Have you found that the groups let people feel more relaxed if they're around their peers, that they open up more? Because I've actually haven't thought about this concept when you're trying to get internal expertise from people that may be a little bit more reluctant to get behind a camera or a microphone.
Yeah, absolutely is. I mean, there's just a lot of psychology that goes into it. Some people have like that red light fear, and as soon as they see the little red light go off, like they just shut down. They are not themselves. So if you create a more conversational atmosphere, they're just kind of riffing off each other. You don't have to over engineer it. So in the podcast that I run on the side, it has primarily been myself, my host, and like a guest. So I am like the annoying guy who will like get it up and running. My host is very technical and gets it moving. But once we go too far down a rabbit hole, kind of like pull it apart. So like there's like a little bit of a circle motion. But in an ideal state, what you're doing is finding people that have not the exact perspective, but there's like healthy contention and not necessarily a level of conflict, but having different perspectives is exactly the area where you find like these sparks, because you're not just creating an echo chamber, you're creating an effect where you're having a conversation that is elevated, where you're going to be able to reach multiple different audiences. You won't have alignment between everyone, but at least there's voices heard. And that probably comes from my journalism background, where you try to get not just two sides, because there's 3 sides, 4 sides, 5 sides, obviously with ethics and all that built into it. So that's kind of where my perspective is on like why you build those groups and comfortability and all that.
I love that. That's awesome. So it brings up an interesting question that's very timely. When you're looking at it, you talked about bringing out the human element. And I think that's so powerful. And whether it's individually or groups or different formats, whatever it may be, giving them a platform. How does that work with AI? How are you measuring and living in both worlds where AI is basically the exact opposite of a personality? Are you playing in both camps? What are you doing? How are you using it to augment what you're doing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So AI is kind of a blessing and a curse. It should not be a situation where you feel like it's going to replace your job. Maybe somewhere down the road, but it hallucinates way too much, which visually I love the absolute crazy graphics of like 8-fingered hands and all that stuff. So I'm not worried about that. So right now,
I saw a guy with a pen finger today on LinkedIn. It was great. There's like 1 million pens on this conference table, and for some reason, his finger had a pen sticking out of the end of it. It was awesome.
That is just so wild. And again, I appreciate that stuff. Like I will use some of those AI videos before ChatGPT launches the store and just kills the other competition out there. But yeah, so the AI perspective, it should be seen as like a system that allows us to move much faster and smarter. And I've definitely seen more ways that it's abused and done wrong. So on the Google side right now, they are pitching newsrooms, and they will pay newsrooms to publish 3 AI articles a day. So they are playing that side of the coin. The other side of the coin, is I chatted with you before we went on, is they're also emphasizing the perspectives tab. So like now there's 1-minute clips, forum posts, and all that stuff. They just spent millions of dollars to officially be able to use scrapers to capture information from Reddit. But they are elevating both sides of the equation, probably to see what works best, or maybe it's a balancing act. So I have to do both. So we are elevating perspectives. We're making sure that there are people front and center with their opinions. But in the same, I'm able to record these conversations, automatically build a transcript, chuck it into Notion AI, tell it to build me a blog outline in 5 seconds, and then I can send that off to a freelancer to be like, hey, just do something with that, give me it back, we'll edit it, and we're good. Before, we had to look through the entire thing, read the thing, watch it, then figure out what the outline is, map it all to a bunch of SEO stuff. And like the world of SEO and all that, it's going to go away. It is now AI content or people content. So that's kind of how I see it, is you got to have a balancing act between the two. AI is not necessarily going to replace our jobs. We got to figure out how to weaponize it, make us move faster. And then you don't have to worry about it coming for us.
Yeah, not true. One of the things that I've seen where people use AI the best is when it has good source material, right? It's working off of, like you said, transcripts, things like that. Are you only using AI to enhance and potentially repurpose content that is coming from people, or do you actually source a, quote unquote original thought from AI? How are you kind of originating the content from that?
Yeah, I've not seen positive results. Like I will not mention the brands because I don't want to be mean to them, but like there are content writing AI tools, and they're like ChatGPT wrappers. They're not good. I've seen idea creation and outline creation, and that's probably the most success straight out of them that I've found. Instead, I absolutely do what I mentioned. So for my podcast, I will record an episode. I will chuck it into Notion AI, the raw transcript, and then I will use a basic prompt that just says, using the transcript below, write me an outline. And then from that outline, I'll then get it to pull out specific things. And I'll also ask it to pull out specific quotes. And that also helps me identify like the key takeaways and all that other stuff. So for my cybersecurity podcast, I spent more energy. I will write like the intro and shape it myself. And then I'll use AI to enhance it for the newer podcast, which is not syndicated to another platform, which has less eyes on, I will use AI basically a lot heavier because I'm just like, less people are reading it. Now, that's chicken egg. If I write crappy stuff with that, will people keep coming back? I don't know. But that's like the mentality I have to run with if I'm going to keep building more and more podcasts under my side project.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think it's the right framework. Is I've worked with AI quite a bit. What I have seen is if you give it good source material, original thought with personalities and experts, then you can get more. But then you also kind of have to use it as the tool, like you said. I'm writing like a really good summary. This paragraph, man, I wish it had a little bit more alliteration. Or I feel like I'm too formal here. Could you help me rewrite this paragraph? Could you do that? And all of a sudden, it enhances your natural ability to produce as opposed to, hey, I want you to write me a blog post on a summary of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Great. You're going to get a really dry, kind of effortless piece of content. And if that's your MO, like, great, you'll produce it in droves. But if you're looking for something that actually provides value and has unique insights, you can still use AI. It's more to enhance than to replace. And I think that sometimes people kind of get those backwards, unfortunately.
Yeah. And again, there is definitely a future state where it should be able to do a lot of this for us. But I think that is why we're seeing like the two sides of the coin approach, where people are getting more hungry for seeing someone on camera talking about things or having bylines. But right now we're like at odds with how that all works because the technology is not yet there to really support it. It's basically taking content, regurgitating it, rewriting it, and for lack of better words, it's basically plagiarism. Like if I put 5 articles in ChatGPT or wherever, like, hey, take all this information and write me a new blog post. Cool. That's straight up plagiarism. That's not cool. And does the same thing with art. But I had a conversation with someone internally like a week ago, and they're like, hey, so how would we do this? How do we, like, what channels do we have to use? Well, it's simple. Don't care about any of that stuff. Record a conversation and make it in a way where, it's usable, raw footage if you need. And from that, you can break it apart a million different ways. You can use AI tools to help do that. But instead of just, I will Slack you, I will send you emails, I'll capture some information, I now do that as the pinnacle starting point. And I can break it apart 100 different ways. And then I figure out what channels it makes sense based on what format, what outcome. But I try not to over engineer it. I just try to have conversations with people. And it just makes content development so much easier now.
That's super powerful. I love it. Yeah. Well, as promised, this time goes by quick. There's so many subjects and areas where we could dive into. I feel like there's a lot more in that area. But if anyone wants to connect with you, Elliot, and continue the conversation, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, totally. So I am unfortunately very active on LinkedIn and Reddit. So you can find me somewhere on one of those. I also have a podcast called Adopting Zero Trust. So if you're interested in modern cybersecurity strategies, there's that one. And then more recently, we have launched Mastering the Art of Failing, which is a newer podcast focused on destigmatizing the concept of failure.
I love it. I love it. And I love the vision of all of that kind of stuff. So we'll make sure we link to everything in the show notes. Elliot, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you picking my brain, but this is definitely an area that I love to talk about.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.